Next morning, the artists went heartily to their work, and I to mine. Former experiences have given me good reason to know that passionate storms, invisible as yet, might be brooding in the calm sun gold. Therefore, before bidding farewell, I warned the artists not to be alarmed should I fail to appear before a week or 10 days, and advised them in case a storm should be set in to keep up big fires and shelter themselves as best they could, and on no account to become frightened and attempt to seek their way back to Yosemite alone through the drifts. My general plan was simply this: to scale the canyon wall, cross over to the eastern flank of the range, and then make my way southward to the southern spurs of Mount Ryder. In compliance with the intervening topography, to push on directly southward from camp throughout the innumerable peaks and pinnacles that adorn this portion of the axis of the range, however interesting, would take too much time, besides being extremely difficult and dangerous at this time of year. All my first days was pure pleasure, simply mountaineering indulgence, crossing the dry pathways of the ancient glaciers, tracing happy streams, and learning the habits of the birds and marmots in the grooves and rocks. Before I had gone a mile from camp, I came to the foot of a white cascade that beats its way down a rugged gorge in the canyon wall from a height of about 900 feet and pours its throbbing waters into the Tuolumne. I was acquainted with its fountains, which, fortunately, lay in my course. What a fine traveling companion it proved to be, what songs it sang, and how passionately it told the mountain's own joy. Gladly I climbed along its dashing border, absorbing its divine traveling companion it proved to be. What songs it sang and how passionately it told the mountain's own joy. Gladly I climbed along its dashing border, absorbing its divine music, and bathing from time to time in waftings of irised spray. Climbing higher, higher, now beauty came streaming on to the sight, painted meadows, late blooming gardens, peaks of rare architecture, lakes here and there shining like silver, and glimpses of the forested middle region and the yellow lowlands far in the west. Beyond the range I saw the so-called Mono Desert, laying dreamily silent in a thick purple light. A desert of heavy sun glare beheld from a desert of ice-burnished granite. Here the waters divide, shouting in glorious enthusiasm, and failing eastward to vanish in the volcanic sands and dry sky of the Great Basin, or westward to the Great Valley of California, and thence through the Bay of San Francisco and the Golden Gate to the sea. Passing a little way down over the summits until I had reached an elevation of about 10,000 feet, I pushed on southward toward a group of savage peaks that stand guard about Ryder on the north and west, groping my way and dealing instinctively with every obstacle as it presented itself. Here, a huge gorge would be found cutting across my path, along the dizzy edge of which I scrambled until some precipitous point was discovered where I might safely venture to the bottom, and then, selecting some feasible portion of the opposite wall, reasoned with the same low caution, massive, flat-top spurs alternate with the gorge, plunging abruptly from the shoulders of the snowy peaks and planting their warm feet in the warm desert. They were everywhere, marked and adorned with characteristic sculptures of the ancient glaciers that swept over this entire region. Like one vast ice wind, and in the polished surfaces produced by this ponderous flow, are still so perfectly preserved and that in many places the sunlight reflected from them is about as trying to the eyes as sheets of snow. God's glacial mills grind slowly, but they have been kept in motion long enough in California to grind sufficient soil for a glacier glorious abundance of life. Though most of the wrist has been carried to the lowlands, leaving those high regions comparatively lean and bare, while the post-glacial agents of erosion have not yet furnished sufficient available food over the great general surfaces for more than a few tufts of the hardiest plants, chiefly carices and aerogenae. And it is interesting to learn in this connection that the sparseness and repressed character of the vegetation at this height is caused more by want of soil than by harshness of climate. For here and there, in the sheltered hollows counterstuck between the general surface, into which a few rods of well-ground moraine chips have been dumped, we find groves of spruce and pine 30 to 40 feet high, trimmed along the edges with willow and huckleberry bushes, and oftentimes still further by an outer ring of tall grass, bright with lupins, larkspurs, and showy columbines, suggesting a climate by no means repressively severe. All the streams, too, and the pools at this elevation are furnished with little gardens wherever soil can be made to lie, which, though making scarce any show at a distance, constitute charming surprises to the appreciative observer. In these bits of leanness for a few birds find graceful homes. Having no acquaintance with man, they fear no ill and flock curiously about the stranger, almost allowing themselves to be taken in the hand. In so wild and so beautiful a region, having spent my first day every sight and sound inspiring, leading one far out of himself, yet feeding and building up his individuality. Now came the solemn, silent evening. Long, blue, spiky shadows crept out from the snowfields, while a rosy glow, at first scarce discernible, gradually deepened and suffused every mountain top, flushing the glaciers and the harsh crags above them. This was the alpine glow. To me, one of the most impressive of all the terrestrial manifestations of God. At the touch of this divine light, the mountains seemed to kindle to a rapt religious consciousness, and stood hushed and waiting like devout worshippers. Just before the alpine glow began to fade, two crimson clouds came streaming across the summit like wings of flame, rendering the sublime scene yet more impressive. Then came darkness and stars. Icy Rider was still miles away, but I could not proceed to go any further than that night. I found a good campground on the rim of the glacier basin, about 11,000 feet above the sea. A small lake nestles in the bottom of it, from which I got water for my tea, and a storm-beaten thicket nearby furnished abundance of resiny firewood. Somber peaks hacked and shattered circled halfway across the horizon, wearing a savage aspect in the glowing, and a waterfall chanted solemnly across the lake on its way down from the foot of the glacier. The fall and the lake and the glacier were almost equally bare, while the scraggly pines anchored in the rock fissures were so dwarfed and shorn by storm winds that you might walk over their tops. In tone and aspect, the scene was one of the most desolate I had ever beheld, but the darkest scriptures of the mountains are illuminated with bright passages of love that never fail to make themselves felt when one is alone. I made my bed in a nook of pine thickets where the branches were pressed and crinkled overhead like a roof, and bent down around the sides. They are, these are the best bed chambers the high mountains afford, snug as squirrel nests, well ventilated, full of spicy odors, and with plenty of night wind played needles to sing one asleep. I little expected company, but creeping in through a low side door, I found 5 or 6 birds nestling among the tassels. The night wind began to blow soon after dark. At first, only a gentle breathing, but increasing toward midnight to a rough gale that fell upon my leafy roof in ragged spurs like a cascade, bearing wild sounds from the crags overhead. The waterfall sang in chorus, filling the old ice fountain with its solemn roar, and seeming to increase in power as the night advanced. Fit voice for such a landscape, I had to creep out many times to the fire during the night, for it was a biting cold and I had no blankets. Gladly I welcomed the morning star. The dawn in the dry, wavering air of the desert was glorious. Everything encouraged my undertaking and betokened success. There was no cloud in the sky, no storm tone in the wind. Breakfast of bread and tea was soon made. I fastened a hard, durable crust to my belt by way of provision, in case I should be compelled to pass on the night mountaintop. Then, securing the remainder of my little stock against wolves and wood rats, I set forth free and hopeful. How glorious a greeting the sun gives the mountains! To behold this alone is worth the pains of any excursion 1,000 times over. The highest peaks burned like islands in the sea of liquid shade. Then the lower peaks and spires caught the glow, and long lances of light, streaming through many a notch and pass, fell thick on the frozen meadows. The majestic form of rider was full in sight, and I pushed rapidly on over rounded rock bosses and pavement, my iron-shod shoes making a clanking sound. Suddenly hushed now, and then in rugs of Bithynia, Athos, and sedgy lake margins soft as moss. Here too, in the so-called land of desolation, I met Cassiope, growing in fringes among the battered rocks. Her blossoms had faded long ago, but they were still clinging with happy memories to the evergreen sprays, and still so beautiful as to thrill every fiber of one's being. Winter and summer, you may hear her voice, the low, sweet melody of her purple bells. No evangel among all the mountain plants speaks nature's love more plainly than the Cassiope. Where she dwells, the redemption of the coldest solitude is complete. The very rocks and glaciers seem to feel her presence, and become imbued with her own fountain sweetness. All things were warming and awakening, frozen rills began to flow. The marmots came out of their nests in boulder piles and climbed away sunny rocks to bask, and the dun-headed sparrows were flitting about seeking their breakfasts. The lakes seen from every ridge top were brilliantly rippled and spangled, shimmering like the thickets of the low dwarf pines. The rocks, too, seemed responsive to the vital heat. Rock crystals and snow crystals, thrilling alike, I strode on exhilarated, as if never to feel fatigue, limbs moving of themselves, every sense unfolding like the thawing flowers, to take part in the new day harmony. All along my course thus far, excepting when down in canyons, the landscapes were mostly open to me and expansive, and at least on one side, on the left, were the purple plains of Mono, reposing drearily and warm on the right, the near peaks springing keenly into thin sky, with more and more impressive sublimity. But these larger views were at length lost. Rugged spurs and moraines and huge projecting buttresses began to shut me in. Every feature became more rigidly alpine, without, however, producing any chilling effect. For going to the mountain is like going home. We always find that the strangest objects in these mountain wilds are in some degree familiar, and we look upon them with a vague sense of having seen them before.